Welcome to another video in this 6-part series in which I explain how to read research and nutrition headlines to know whether or not they are applicable to you. My name is Stephanie Dunn. I'm a registered dietitian and the founder of Feed Your Intention. I guide women to nourish their wellness and reclaim their wholeness. I hope that when you complete watching the 6-part series, that you will really feel informed about why nutrition research isn't quite as cut and dried as we'd like to think it is, and how you can use the information as you achieve your optimal health and well-being. Now, the next thing we have to talk about is how tricky research is, because humans live real lives. We are not rats living in cages. We're almost everything about our lives, from the food we eat to the environment we live in to the interactions we have with others can be controlled, right? We are in a constantly changing, evolving body, internal environment, as well as external environment. And that means that no matter how hard researchers try, they cannot possibly account for all of the things about a human that could impact the outcome of a research study, whether it's an intervention study or an observational study, right? Because in the example we just talked about, we don't know if the people who were more likely to gain weight over that time period, whether or not they were also experienced increased stress in their life. We don't know if any of the people were choosing to take hormone replacement therapy and whether or not that had an impact on the weight changes that were experienced over the course of that 12 years. There are lots of other things that can impact the outcome of a study, whether that's an intervention or simply what we're looking at over time. And those things are called confounding variables. And any quality research study will at least acknowledge that confounding variables exist and likely list them. And many will even try to account for them in the statistical analysis. They end up running what's called multivariate analysis, meaning they're looking at multiple variables at the same time to see which of them is actually impacting the outcome. So let's look at an example. So this study, again, linked at the bottom, did a multivariate analysis looking at the risk of various cardiovascular outcomes based on many factors. So I've pulled this specific set of data to show how total cholesterol, meaning high total cholesterol, is related to various cardiovascular events for women specifically, because the data is different from men. And in this particular study, they separated the two, which is super duper helpful. So let me explain briefly how to read this table and what it means. So this first column shows the different types of cardiovascular events. The first line shows us total cardiovascular events, where we don't split them all out. Then there's myocardial infarction, which means a heart attack. And then there's angina, which is chest pain or discomfort caused by heart muscles not receiving enough oxygen. And that could be possibly due to a blocked artery that doesn't allow enough blood to flow into the heart, as an example. Now, stable angina happens predictably, such as with physical exertion or emotional stress, for example. And unstable angina is considered a medical emergency because sometimes it happens when the person is completely at rest, and it is a strong predictor of an impending heart attack. As we discussed a little bit ago, the hazard ratio is how likely an event is to occur when one thing is true versus when that one thing is not true. So in this case, we're going to take the top line as an example. So how likely is it that a person will experience a cardiovascular disease event at all if their total cholesterol is greater than 200 milligrams per deciliter versus if their total cholesterol is less than 200 milligrams per deciliter. And again, that's equivalent to 5.2 millimoles per liter for those of you who are in Canada or Europe. So this first line, the crude hazard ratio, means that if they only looked at total cholesterol and absolutely no other factors, other than the fact that this is a woman, no other factors about these women at all, that is the crude hazard ratio, meaning we are just looking at total cardiovascular events against total cholesterol being greater than 200 milligrams per deciliter. And the risk of having any cardiovascular disease event is greater when the total cholesterol is more than 200 milligrams per deciliter, right? So that hazard ratio, we talked about it, if it's over 1, then it is more likely to happen, right? So that's it if we're looking at just one thing. So if the hazard ratio was 1, that would mean the risk is the same, just as a reminder, right? So if it's greater than 1, it is more likely to occur. For this, if the hazard ratio was 1, then it means the risk of any cardiovascular disease event is the same if total cholesterol is greater than 200 milligrams per deciliter or if it's less than 200 milligrams per deciliter. So this means that when the researchers only looked at total cholesterol and cardiovascular disease events in women, they definitely were more likely to experience a cardiovascular event if their total cholesterol was high, meaning over 200 milligrams per deciliter. However, when the researchers did what is called multivariate analysis, meaning they took into consideration the confounding variables that could contribute to cardiovascular disease events, which include age, body mass index, family history, smoking status, certain types of drugs, whether the person has diabetes or hypertension, how they fare on the healthy eating index, and what their total energy or calorie intake is. When they considered all of these factors, then the risk of experiencing a cardiovascular disease event was lower with high cholesterol than when cholesterol was lower than 200 milligrams per deciliter, right? Because this hazard ratio is now less than 1. That means that total cholesterol greater than 200 milligrams per deciliter is protective when these other factors are taken into consideration, or more accurately, depending on what is the data of these other factors, depending on the age of the person, depending on their body mass index, depending on their smoking status, depending on how healthfully they eat. And this holds true for every single one of these cardiovascular events. For any cardiovascular disease event, there's lower risk with high total cholesterol. For heart attacks, same thing. For angina, same thing. Both types of angina. Now, for stable angina, there is still a risk. You can see it's still above 1, but it is lower, right, than the 2.16 number. Now, does this mean that your total cholesterol number doesn't matter? No, of course, that's not what this means. As we saw, obviously, when we talked about a different study that showed that sort of U shape on the impact of dying as it relates to total cholesterol. It definitely does matter. And we can see that here, right? This is the confidence interval. It means that we are 95% confident that the true statistical number, the real risk, is somewhere in this range based on the data from this study. So the risk still could be above 1. Again, for any given person, depending on all of those confounding variables. However, you are not necessarily at greater risk simply because your total cholesterol is higher than 200 milligrams per deciliter. What are the known confounding variables for many, if not all, health studies? Well, this is the list. All of these variables have been proven to impact nutrition and health research at one time or another. And these are why it is genuinely difficult to isolate the effect of a single dietary intervention or the effect of one blood marker on an outcome that we're trying to prevent, or the effect of a medication even. And it's why the same study result can mean one thing for one woman and something completely different for another woman, because all of these variables come into play. And as you can see from that list, it would be impossible for research to take all of those variables into account. Researchers couldn't find a big enough population that matched all of the variables. We would end up with population studies of just 10 people. And even then, the results wouldn't therefore really be applicable to a broader population. And the complexity of the math would be impossible and therefore ultimately meaningless if we tried to take into account absolutely all of these confounding variables. So researchers do their absolute best, and the information they give us is super helpful, right? Science is so fascinating in helping us to understand the human body better. But why am I explaining all this? Well, whenever I talk to any woman about her cholesterol number, I try really hard to reassure her that her high number may not be as meaningful or as impactful as the lab results paper or maybe even her doctor have led her to believe. Now, before I go on, let me be very clear and say I am not suggesting that any woman ignore medical advice. You should absolutely talk to your doctor and take their advice into consideration. Like, I cannot make medical decisions for you. But what I am saying is that one number on a lab report does not define what is going to happen for you as a result of that one lab number. There is so much more that is going to go into how we interpret the information that one lab number or even 3 lab numbers, because we have to consider all the other factors in your life that determine how significant that one number is. We need to figure out what are your confounding variables that may shift the answer about what the next best step is for you in relation to that number. I hope you found the information in this video helpful. If it felt like it ended kind of abruptly, that's because when I recorded these videos, they were originally one long video and I decided that that was too much, so I cut them up into smaller videos. I hope you'll check out the other videos in this series so that you can have a really complete picture about the various aspects of nutrition research and how to read them, plus how to read the headlines that come from that research to know whether or not the information is applicable to you. So please check out the other videos in this series, and in the meantime, I wish you wellness and wholeness.